So, let's talk about the current state of enhancing Kharazad accessories and how they compare to enhancing or buying pen Deberekas. This question comes up more often as Kharazad has become less appealing to enhance. Now, that doesn't mean enhancing Kharazad is wrong or bad, but other options are becoming a lot more competitive. In this video, we'll look at whether Kharazad is still worth enhancing, the common traps that newer and mid-game players should avoid, and what options make the most sense depending on your progression. If you've already committed to Kharazad, I'll also share advice on what you can do. Finally, we'll also look at what PA could do to improve Kharazad and address some of the issues that players are running into. This video is aimed at newer players, so we will go over some very basic information. Timestamps will always be included in the video, so feel free to skip to any part that you want. First, to understand the state of enhancing Kharazad accessories, we need to know what they are. Ignoring the niche accessories such as River and Asadel Neck, Kharazad accessories are widely touted as the best in-slot accessory, used by nearly every endgame PvE and PvPer. If you look at most endgame players' gear wheels, they'll almost always have full Kharazad. However, this notion of Kharazad being best in slot can cause some newer players to commit into Kharazad without really considering other options. Sure, from Nov to deck, Kharazad is basically the best choice, but from base to Nov, there are many options to get into Kharazad. The reason why this is so important is because once you commit to Kharazad, there is no way to sell or salvage your Kharazad. The only way to get out would be to buy an entirely new accessory. You really have to make sure which path is right for you before you commit into crafting any Kharazad. With that being said, there are 3 very viable windows to transition into Kharazad. You can start from base and enhance all the way up, you can buy a Tet Deboreka and transform it into a Pen Kharazad, or buy a Pen Deboreka and transition that into a Nov Kharazad. Now, while the bulk of this video will focus on the Pen to Nov Kharazad comparison, let's quickly look at crafting, then enhancing base Kharazads to Pen. Kharazads below Pen aren't as common since there are cheaper alternatives, but players can still take advantage of this route. Making and enhancing base Kharazads to Pen can sometimes be a little bit cheaper, around 25 to 28 bill on average compared to buying Tet Debos. Keep in mind, if you do go this route, you won't get the free Jin AP crystal, which is currently worth 3 billion silver. You would really just have to look at market prices along with how many stacks you have to see which one is more worth. Currently, it's a little bit debatable, but not as worth it to make them. Now, the really big catch is though, that this path locks you into the same enhancing Kharazad to Nov grind that buying a Tet Debo and converting does. And that really brings us to the main focus of this video, deciding whether it's more worthwhile to go from Tet Debo to Pen Kharazad and enhance up to Nov Kharazad, or to save up for Pen Debo and convert it straight to Nov Kharazad. As most people familiar with my channel know, I'd like backing up my suggestions with concrete numbers. We will go over the explicit costs later in this video, but first, we don't need to dive too deep into the numbers just yet. We can use our intuition to see what the cheaper path may be, just by knowing a little bit of Kharazad's history in BDO. Looking back to the past, Kharazad was released almost an entire year ago on October 31st of 2024. Now, that might not seem like that long ago, but the game was honestly quite different back then. Base Deberekas weren't nearly as ubiquitous as they are now. You had to grind specific zones for them, drop rates were lower, and we didn't kill mobs as fast. This was reflected in the price of Deboreka necklaces on the central market, as their base accessories still sat at max price and needed to be pre-ordered before Kharazad got announced. Because of this scarcity, some players, even with the chance of downgrading, still cronned their Pen Debo taps. As a result, Pen Deboreka accessories were significantly more expensive. Pen necks sat on the central market for around 230 bill, belts around 250, and rings and earrings were 280 bill plus. Now, this was the environment that Kharazad was dropped into. It was meant to change things up by offering players a slightly cheaper alternative to debos, but most importantly, giving players intermediary steps between Tet and Pen debos, as the price difference between them was just so massive. Fast forward to now though, things have really changed. We've gotten many more sources for all types of debos, and they've become a regular drop in PvE. On top of that, players no longer cron their debo taps, making the cost of crons no longer a factor. As a result, almost every pen debo has nearly halved in price, with debo necks being 115 bill, belts 130, and earring rings around 150 bill. Kharazad on the other hand hasn't really changed at all. The pity system, chance of success, even the biggest expense, the cost of crons, have all stayed the exact same. Sure, it's gotten a bit easier to build higher stacks and buy essences of dawns, but that's about it. Since most of the major expenses haven't changed, the cost of enhancing Kharazad is pretty similar to when it was first released. So, without doing any number crunching just yet, it's easy to intuit why enhancing Kharazad has become much less appealing. The alternative, buying pen debos and swapping them for Nov Kharazad, has gotten so much cheaper, while the cost of self-enhancing Kharazad has stayed basically the same. That said, this doesn't mean that going the Kharazad route is wrong or strictly worse than buying a pen debo, but as mentioned earlier, once you commit to Kharazad, there is no way to transition out. This makes it critical to decide which path is best early on. The only way to really judge which path is worth it for you is to dive deeper into the numbers. So, let's start with the first comparison. Which one of these two paths is cheaper on average in terms of silver? While this isn't the be-all end-all, it's a very important metric to consider. The method we'll be using to calculate the Kharazad numbers is a simple cost analysis. We don't need anything too complex such as expected values, since as mentioned earlier, Kharazad can't be sold or salvaged at any enhancement level. Because of this, we don't need to calculate selling or rebuying any of the intermediate enhancements. All we need to find out is the average cost of enhancing Kharazad to Nov, and how much that compares to buying a pen debo and converting it to Kharazad. Whichever path has the lower average silver cost will get the point for this section. We won't value enhancing debos ourselves, as even if they could be cheaper, comparing Kharazad to the guaranteed market price of buying pen debos will make things easier. That may seem pretty intuitive, but cost side analysis can be a little bit jarring if you haven't done it before, so we will go over each bit step by step. So to set things up, we first need to look at the cost of materials required for enhancing. As mentioned earlier, the bulk of the costs come from crons. A smaller portion comes from stacks, while the rest, like memory fragments and dawns, make up a small fraction. For most of this video, we'll use a cron cost of 3 million silver each, since that's the price any player can reliably buy from the blacksmith without worrying about bottlenecks. Later, we'll also show how the numbers change at 2.18 million per cron for players who pre-order their crons. Fail stacks will use the central market price, buying 100 fail stacks with crystallized despairs and boosting with origins of dark hungers to get our desired stacks. We won't take into account Valk's cries or base stacks, which can save a lot of silver. While many players can build stacks for cheaper, this sets a maximum cost and keeps our comparisons consistent. Since stack costs are much smaller compared to crons, these estimates are still pretty good. Finally, for essences of dawns and memory fragments, we'll set them at 100 mil and 2 mil each. These costs fluctuate a lot, but aren't as expensive as stacks or crons. With these basic costs out of the way, we can look at the actual calculations. So let's start by looking at the average cost of enhancing pen Kharazad up to Hex. Now, to figure out the average costs, I like to break the costs into all possible outcomes, the guaranteed costs, the cost on success, and the cost on failure. First, let's look at the guaranteed costs. Every time you use crons on a Hex Kharazad attempt, you'll be spending 1,090 crons and 8 essences of Dawns. This is around 4 billion and 70 million silver per tap. Since Kharazad accessories should always be croned, this is the minimum cost. No matter what the result is, even if your game crashes the moment you click enhance, this silver will be gone. The next 2 costs depend on the outcome. Let's start with failing first. Each fail takes 20 max durability on your accessory, and repairing that costs 20 memory fragments, which is around 40 million silver. And finally, the cost of success. This one feels a little counterintuitive since succeeding actually costs more silver. This is because you consume your fail stack on success. In this case, a 188 fail stack is one of the most efficient choices, which is worth around 6.5 billion silver. Once we know the 3 possible outcomes and their costs, we just need to combine them. With a 188 stack, our chance of success is around 25.5%, and failure is around 74.5%. Adding everything together, the average cost per tap comes out to be around 5.76 billion silver. Multiplying that by the average 3.9 taps it takes to succeed, and the total average cost of going from pen to hex is around 22.5 billion silver. Of course, RNG will be RNG. Some players may one-tap their Kharazads, while others may go all the way to pity. But if we're asking for a realistic estimate that players should expect, 22.5 billion silver becomes the most reasonable estimate. That said, this does overestimate the costs by about 10%, since there are 3 possible savings, which is the bonus stacks you get from failing cron attempts, the Agris Pity system, and the bonus fail stacks from Valk's cries and permanent account fail stacks. I'll go into those later when we look at the total cost, but just know that these can save a decent amount of silver. So, knowing how to get the average costs from pen to hex, we can apply the same method from hex all the way to Nov. Hex to Sep costs around 36.7 billion silver, Sep to Oct costs 59.8 billion silver, and Oct to Nov costs around 124.6 billion silver. Altogether, enhancing from pen to Nov Kharazad averages around 244 billion silver, and that's not even including the initial cost of getting pen Kharazad through Tet Debo exchange or self-enhancing Kharazad to pen. Now, back when pen debos were around 250 billion silver, the costs were at least comparable. But now, with pen debos sitting around 100 to 150 billion silver, and no need to use crons on them, the average cost of Kharazad becomes almost 2 times more expensive. Remember, both paths end up with the same result, a Nov Kharazad. Now, the biggest issue with self-enhancing Kharazads is the extremes. Even if you're incredibly lucky and one-tap every step with reasonable stacks and crons, you're still paying at minimum 50 to 80 billion silver depending on how you value crons. This is already 3/4 of a pen debo and only has a 0.07% chance of happening. On the other hand, if you pity all the way from pen to Nov, you can spend up to 521 billion silver, the costs of 3 pen debos. Even pitying just the final Oct to Nov enhance costs around 252 billion silver, which at a 300 stack has a 7% chance of happening, 10 times the chance of one-tapping all the way to Nov. But what about the savings we mentioned earlier? Using Valk's cries and the bonus stacks you get from failing cron attempts, you can lower the average to about 225 billion silver, which is about an 8% saving. Outfit crons can also give you even more savings, but unlike the stacks, they're not guaranteed. Since crons are the biggest cost, and outfit crons are about 27% cheaper, the overall cost drops down to around 185 billion silver. But once you add in the cost of getting a pen Kharazad to begin with, the realistic cheapest path is around 200 billion silver. I will also mention here that if Dawns crash down to min or a lower price, they can save around 7 to 10 billion silver, but remember, unlike debos, a large chunk of the cost is tied to crons, which price shouldn't ever really go down. So even if Dons go to min, you are still likely going to be paying more with Kharazad than debos. However, with all that being said, at the end of the day, self-enhancing Kharazad from pen to Nov is going to be significantly more expensive than buying pen debos at the current market price. So, as promised earlier, what if you've already committed to Kharazad? Since the average cost of enhancing shoots up so steeply at the later levels, would it make sense to cut your losses and swap to buying pen debos? Well, in some cases, yeah. First off, we have to ignore the sunk cost fallacy. Silver already spent doesn't really matter, only the silver you'll need to spend going forward does. For example, if you look at the necklace slot, even if you're sitting at OCT Kharazad, technically it's still cheaper on average to delete it and buy a pen debo neck, since the OCT to Nov enhance alone costs around 113 to 124 billion silver on average. For other accessory slots, the tipping point would be SEP, as that adds another 55 to 60 billion silver on average, totaling 168 to 184 billion silver from SEP to Nov. That said, this is heavily dependent on the central market, so always compare the average enhanced cost with the cost of pen debos before making your decision. However, if you can consistently get crons for cheaper than 3 million, these brackets may become tighter, and enhancing from SEP to OCT Kharazads may become more worth it. Finally, if you are a more casual player who stockpiles free crons from events, it can be valid to enhance 1 or even 2 Kharazad accessories on the side while saving your silver for other pen debos. You'll still be spending more on average, but silver isn't everything, especially if you are a more casual player. So, now that we've gone over the math, let's be real here. This is absolutely atrocious game design. Remember, silver isn't the only factor players have to deal with. On paper, Kharazad should be the more modern, player-centric path. It offers intermediary steps, a nice sense of progression, interaction with the new crystals, and protection from destruction or downgrades when cronned. Most importantly, it lets you enhance the gear you're already wearing, making it feel like you're progressing your own personal items. By contrast, saving up for pen debos is just buying a pre-made item off the market made by another player after slowly accruing silver for multiple weeks. It completely skips the personal, hands-on gear progression that PA constantly claims to promote. To make things worse, Kharazad is required for parts of the Idania update, which makes it counterintuitive that players are being punished for choosing the intended path. Remember, the numbers are brutal. On average, you can nearly buy an entire wheel of pen debos for the price of enhancing just 3 to 4 Kharazad accessories. Even players who've already pushed to SEP or even OCT Kharazad are now being told it would be smarter to stop and start saving for debos instead. That's kind of the despair many players are feeling right now. They followed the advice of popular streamers, their guildies, and even PA's own design cues, only to be left staring at their pen, Hex, Sept, and even OCT Kharazads, wondering where they went wrong. This is simply just not healthy game design. Kharazad was meant to be the forward-facing alternative to debos, but in today's market, it simply isn't properly balanced. That being said, it's not completely over. This can still be fixed, not by us players, but by PA. This leads us to the next part of the video, what PA can do to fix these issues. Now, to the ever overworked PA intern who might be watching, I do apologize for adding more work to your plate, but I'll make it worth your time with a few suggestions that you can pass up the chain. Now, of course, I'm not claiming these ideas are better than what a whole team of paid developers can come up with, but they're a good place to start. The core principles should be simple. Players shouldn't feel like they've wasted resources. If someone is sitting on base to OCT Kharazads or have put taps into Agris Pity, they should be able to extract some value from that progress. At the same time, any new system needs to avoid crashing the market, so a straight trade-in for items like Essences of Dawns isn't the answer. The easiest solution is to tie Kharazad enhancement costs to the price of debos. This could be done with a new enhancement currency similar to the Crystals of Origins used for Fallen God armors. Melting a pen debo would give enough of this currency to take a Kharazad from base to Nov, with lower tier debos giving proportional amounts. These mats could also be sold on the central market, allowing players to get those intermediary upgrades without having to buy a full pen debo. Along with this, Kharazads should be swappable back to debos. In case a player is stuck with multiple Kharazads, they could push them to Nov and swap them to pen debo. Of course, I'd love to see guaranteed upgrades with these mats, but realistically, PA would probably keep some RNG in the process. Keeping Kharazads based on self-enhancing would also allow players to use any agris that they have saved up. Either way though, this new system would ensure that enhancing Kharazads would track a lot closer to debo prices, while giving players the modern benefits that Kharazad brings, like the intermediary steps and personal progression. If debos rise in value, Kharazad enhancement costs would also rise alongside them, keeping the balance intact. On top of that, PA has already shown that they're comfortable with this kind of design, as the newer zones drop Fallen God enhancement mats that function very similarly. Now this is just a rough idea, but it solves the main issues of Kharazad while letting players not get punished for choosing the path that PA themselves want to push. Again, the only people that can solve this issue is PA, and I do hope they take some steps to fix it. Gear progression is such a fundamental part of BDO that it is alarming that such an odd pitfall exists in the standard gearing path. So that's where Kharazad stands right now. It's not a total wash, but it's definitely not the smooth upgrade path it was meant to be. If you are a new player deciding between self-enhancing Kharazad or going pen debo, with today's market prices, the debo route will simply be cheaper. Yes, you can get more AP faster with Kharazad, but the costs simply don't justify it for most people. If you're already invested into Kharazad, you shouldn't feel bad, as in the past, it was a perfectly reasonable choice based on how popular streamers and the market were leaning towards. The real hope is that PA steps in to bring Kharazad back in line, to turn it into the more modern, player-centric enhancement path that it was meant to be. But that's basically it for this video. If you have any questions or requests, feel free to comment below or join my new Discord server, as I always try to answer any questions that I see there. Either way, I hope you all learned something from this video, and I hope to see you all next time. Okay, as a little bonus section, very quickly, I just want to do a small aside/disclaimer. I wanted to put this in the beginning, but it was kind of weird and it broke up the pacing a little bit too much, and it very negatively impacted the vibe of the video. But I will mention that I recently found out there was some drama based around Kharazad. I don't know how this is even possible, but hey, BDO will be BDO. The disclaimer is of course that this video has nothing to do with that, nor does it support or opposes any of the content creators included. I haven't heard or watched either of their content, but I did hear about this when I was talking to community members about Kharazad. Unfortunately, these videos take way too long for me to make, and had I sat down and put all my time into this video, I would have released it earlier and avoided any possible drama, but it is what it is. Luckily, it seems their debate is more along the lines of gearing pathing, while this video is more of an explanation to newer players of how Kharazad has come to this point, and a call to action for PA to help fix some of the friction that has surfaced. That being said, I am going to try to release more content and stream a bit more. I even wanted to mess around with the ever abhorrent shorts format, so hey, look out for that if you're interested. If you like or dislike any of the new tests and content format, feel free to let me know, either here or on my Discord server. I genuinely appreciate any feedback I can get. But that's about it for this long-winded aside. I'll see you guys later.